So we are here today. We're going to be talking about building and rebuilding community using literacy supports to affirm student identity next week and next year. And in case you haven't noticed, I'm trying to win the award for longest PD names each week. This week's is very long, my apologies, but there was a lot to say in that title. So we're gonna go over today. It's gonna look a little different. Like normally I have like really set times and I show you something and then we create it together, and like my PDs tend to be structured very similar. And this is very different what we're gonna do today. What we're doing today is sort of gonna be like a buffet of strategies or activities that you could use within your classroom in order to build identity. And so we're going to start by talking about why identity matters. And then we're going to look at how to build identity through Reader's Workshop, how to build identity through talk, how to build identity through Writer's Workshop. And then we'll have our closure and feedback. So we're kind of taking two worlds here, the world of social justice, as well as Readers and Writers Workshop. And we're looking today, sort of the theme of today is how do we combine those two worlds? And it's done pretty easily. So I hope that you guys will enjoy what we go over today. Okay, so what you're gonna need for today, this is also a little bit different. Normally you kind of just like are there and you just click on things. Today you are going to need a few pieces of paper. I even set up my Elmo for today, which was pretty exciting. And you're gonna need a writing utensil. If you have colors, great. If you just have a pencil or a pen, that works too. And what we're going to do right now is I'm going to give you 1 minute, and I would like for you to please on a piece of paper, and if you still need to get paper and a pencil, go ahead and do that. I'm going to give you 1 minute to draw a scientist. Okay, so go ahead and take 1 minute and draw a scientist. I'm going to set the timer on my clock so that I'm faithful to my word. And it doesn't have to be fancy, just a scientist. Five seconds. Okay, and go ahead and stop. So if you're just joining us right now, you just need a piece of paper, a writing utensil, and we just took 1 minute right now to draw a scientist. So once you've drawn your scientist, go ahead and you can put that to the side. We're going to come back to that later in our training today. So I wanted to start today with a video by a poet, just an amazingly talented poet. Her name is Elizabeth Acevedo, and she is one of the sort of pioneers of one of the poet activists that we see really on the front lines of social justice. And she has a poem that is a beautiful poem. I thought we would start there today. So we're going to start at a seminar that she gave where she sort of explains the background of why she wrote this poem. And as we're doing this, like kind of the idea that I want us to walk away with is that every student has a story, an identity, and a poem to write. So let me go ahead and play that now.
I want to give thanks to the Aspen Institute for asking me to be here. I'm going to tell you a couple of stories that I think are important to this idea of the wound needing a witness. I got my master's in creative writing in a program that was about 25 folks in it. And I was the only student of Afro descent. I was the only student of an immigrant background. I was the only student from a major urban hub. I was born and raised in New York City. You might be able to tell from my accent. And it was a fascinating space to navigate. I got my undergraduate degree at the George Washington University, so I was familiar with PWIs. Like, this wasn't new to me. But in undergrad, it felt like a lot of the aggressions that I felt were very macro. It was very clear that certain people were coming from backgrounds that were inherited. I understood that. In a creative writing program where you're submitting poems every week and you're getting critique back and it's being circled and question marks, and I'm like, oh, you didn't want to Google that? You didn't want to look that up, right? It's very different and it feels very personal. And I'm gonna give you all an example. One day my professor came to class and he's like this old school, like Robert Frost in the face, like long beard, right? And he's like, I just read the most amazing poem about deer. And y'all, I have no beef with deer, right? Like, I am not here to hate on anybody's wildlife. I think venison is delicious. Like, that was not my issue. I do think there is this stereotype in the literary arts of what symbols, right, are good enough to write about. And the deer and the clouds and certain flowers are one of them, right? And this professor, because grad school classes are long, for 2.5 hours goes on about this deer. But then he took it one step further. And he wanted everyone in the room to go around and say, if they were to write an animal ode, and an ode is a praise poem, right? What animal they would pick and why. And so it goes to one classmate, and my classmate is like, well, like Elizabeth Bishop, I would write about the blackbird. And I'm like, we saw that joint 13 times, like, promise me, like, you don't need to do the blackbird again. He goes to another classmate, he's like, I would write about sea anemones. And I'm Googling on the table, like, what is a sea anemone? Why would we write about that, right? And then my professor gets to me. And it's my first year of grad school. I'm like, okay, they always say, write what you know. I'm trying to be like, impress this person. I'm like, I would write about rats. Because if you grow up in any major city, you know you some rats, right? You know, pigeons are just rats with wings. You know, squirrels are just rats with nice coats. They're all rats. And we know them well. And in front of all of my classmates, in a space I often already felt isolated, my professor looked at me and laughed. And he said, rats are not noble enough creatures for a poem. Liz, I think you need more experiences. So I wrote this piece. It's called Rat Ode. It is my official clap back to that professor. But mainly it serves as a reminder for any of us who have ever been told our stories are too small or too ugly or too little for high art, right? That we are all deserving of poetry.
Okay, so do you guys want to hear this poem? Wouldn't that be horrible if I just stopped right there? Okay, so here is the poem, A Rat Ode.
For the professor who told me that rats aren't noble enough creatures for a poem, a rat ode. Because you are not the admired nightingale. Because you are not the noble doe. Because you are not the picturesque ermine, armadillo, or bat. They have been written, and I don't know their song the way I know you're scuttling between walls. The scent of your collapsed corpse rotting beneath floorboards. Your frantic squeals as you pull at your own fur from glue traps, ripping flesh from skin in an attempt to survive. Because in July of '97, you birthed a legion on 109th, swarmed from behind the dumpsters, made our streets infamous for something other than crack. We nicknamed you Cat Killer, raced with you through open hydrants, squeaked like you when Siete blasted aluminum bat into your brethren's skull. The sound slapped down dominoes. You reigned that summer rat. And even when they sent exterminators, half dead and on fire, you pushed on. Because even though you are an inelegant, simple mammal bottom feeder, always freaking famished, little ugly thing who feasts on what crumbs fall from the corners of our mouths. You live uncuddled, uncoddled, can't be bought at Petco and fed to fat snakes because you are not the maze rat of labs, pale, pretty-eyed, trained. You raise yourself, sharp fang, clawed, scarred, patched, dark, because of this they should love you. But look at the beast, the professor tells me. The table is already full, and rat, you are not a right-worthy thing. Every time they say that, take your gutter, your dirt coat, filth this page, rat. Scrape your underbelly against street, concrete. You better squeak and raise the whole world, rat. Let loose a plague of words, rat, and remind them that you, that I, we are worthy of every poem. Here.
So later in the seminar, she shares about how when she goes to present her thesis, that poem was included in her thesis, and that professor that he was part of the panel that was there to approve her thesis. And when she read that poem, he said, "What inspired you to write that poem?" He didn't even remember the incident that had happened. And she talks about how that moment, because of who she was, sort of set her identity, because she was able to take that and form her identity or purpose in her movement through her work. And she refers to it as, from that moment on, I wrote rat poems. And that's her way of sort of saying that from that moment on, she embraced the battle of social justice. And but it was just so interesting for her to talk about how her identity, her poem, who she was, what her experiences and her culture that she came from growing up in New York City, how it wasn't enough for the world that she was living in. And so I share that poem today because, and let me see if I can get us back in full screen here. Give me 1 second. Because as we think about our role as teachers and our ability to embrace and to encourage this sort of discovery and acceptance of identity amongst our students, and this ability that we have to sort of broaden the range of what identity can be, and take away what is that like center or that norm of what we think identity should be, because it falls within our lens of what we've experienced. And as teachers, we play that role in a mighty, mighty way. And especially as we go back to school, and our students have been through things that we can't necessarily imagine at this point, it opens up an opportunity for us to do that work. And so today, a lot of the work that we're going to be looking at, not all of it, but some of it, comes from Sarah Ahmed, and she wrote the book Being the Change. And she wrote this. She said, "We have an obligation to make kids feel visible. When we recognize and value students' identities, we make time and space for them in the daily classroom routines, curriculum, and dialogue. We can help students shine a light on who they are, their hopes and dreams, talents, family histories, how they identify culturally, the languages they speak, how they learn best, the story of their names, what they can teach us." So as we're thinking about the beginning of the year next year, right? I titled this training Building Community Today and Tomorrow, right? So building and rebuilding community. And yes, some of these things you could this week, next week, use as an end of the year activity, but also some of this might be just sort of a tool that you sort of pocket away for next year. And as we're thinking about the beginning of the year, some of these activities that I'm going to share with you today will be really just perfect for that. So the question that I want to ask is, what are some of your goals for the beginning of the year? Go ahead and think to yourself just for a second. You don't have to look at the ones underneath there yet, but go ahead and take a moment and just think through on your head. what in your head, what are some of your goals for the beginning of the year next year? I'm sure that many of you guys are thinking about creating safe environments, setting routines, getting to know your students. And Sarah Ahmed, she kind of gave a list of what were some of her goals for the beginning of each year. And this is what they were: to engage in self-identifying and self-reflection, for students to be able to honor their own families, cultures, and languages, to negotiate their identities in this world, to connect and wonder about the identities of others, to affirm who they are, to speak their truths and accept what others say as their truth, co-construct what it looks and feels like to share the planet with other human beings, and then a goal for herself, for me to do my best listening so I can tailor the learning experience for them. And I thought that these goals were really interesting in that they were so specific. And as you know, we're kind of living in times right now where the topic of social justice is at the forefront in a way that it's never been before. And as we think about what our goals are for students next year in this area, this issue is important enough where it deserves goals that are specific, goals that lay out exactly what the work is that we want to do with our kids next year, and the work that you probably have already been doing with your kids this year. And I thought that the way that she bullet pointed these was really impressive. So now as we look at this training today, the social justice standards come to mind. And the social justice standards, there's different domains. There's identity, diversity, justice, and action. But today we're going to be focusing just on identity, and we're mostly going to be focusing on the first strand of that, which is students will develop positive social identities based on their membership in multiple groups in society. And if you're not familiar with these standards, they have similar versions of this throughout the grade level. So like a K2 student would be able to, by the end, say, I know and like who I am, and I can talk about my family, myself, and name some of my group identities. A 3 through 5 student will say, I know and like who I am and can talk about my family and myself and describe our various group identities. And a 6 through 8 student would be able to say, I know and like who I am and can comfortably talk about my family and myself and describe our various group identities. Now, as we think about some of the activities that we're going to be going over right now, there's some of these conversations, some of these activities are difficult conversations to have. They're difficult activities to do. And sometimes difficult can be scary, because difficult is not something that we can always control. And so it really is important that as teachers, before we even begin the work of thinking about doing these types of activities with our students, we have to build some sort of safe environments. And a lot of that means guidelines even for ourselves. So Sarah Ahmed, she suggests these 7 guidelines. So the first is to do the work yourself and to do it often. So anything that you are going to try with your kids, try it yourself first. Go through the process first. And we're going to do that with one of our items today. Then the next is keep the focus on the kids, not you. And this is something that I'm so guilty of. Like when somebody says, oh, I'm going through this, like my first thing is, oh, I totally can relate because blah, blah, blah. And I bring it back to me. And honestly, we do that because not because I really genuinely don't think it's because we're selfish or because we're self-centered. It's because we're trying to connect with that person. We're trying to show them like, I feel what you're feeling because I have gone through something similar. But there's sort of a fallacy in that thinking, because what we really need to understand is that connecting does not necessarily always equal empathy. And she said something in her book. She said, don't just wait for your opportunity to talk, like as a teacher, like waiting for a student to finish so that you can sort of redirect that conversation or facilitate it in a certain direction. And then the third one is consider how you see your kids. So when you think about your students, right, are you seeing them how they see themselves or how you define them? So like, what are the ways that we define our students? Oh, that one is a struggling reader. That this student, he's really strong at math. He's really social. So, and is there something inherently wrong with that? Not necessarily. Those are things we notice in them, but it's not necessarily the way they would describe themselves or identify themselves. So then we're putting our interpretation of their identity upon them, even sort of subconsciously without knowing it. So there's a researcher and teacher, his name is Don Graves, and he put a challenge out, and I thought we could try this right now. We're going to do this for 1 minute. I want you to think about one student that you have this year. And I want you to think about 10 things that you know about that child as a person, because they've shared it with you. Not because you've noticed it, but because they have let you in on that part of their life of who they are. Okay, so try to see how many you can write. I'm going to give you 1 minute. Okay, go ahead and do that now. Five more seconds. Okay, so now how easy or challenging was that? And now the question is, so you probably chose the student, if we're thinking about it, if you look at the student that you chose, it's probably one that you feel very connected with or that you know a lot about. How easy or challenging might it be to do that for your entire roster? Especially those kids that haven't turned on their video camera all year, right? Or the kids that don't maybe show up to class. How easy would it be, or how challenging would it be? And he puts this challenge out there where he says, next to each child's name, so take a roster at the beginning of the year, that roster is all about what you have learned about those kids. And keep a running list of those 10 things that they share with you about themselves, not the 10 things that you notice or that you assume, but pieces, and this is the way he words it, that they trust you with. So they've built that trust enough with you to let you in on who they see themselves to be. Now, if we've been doing this work of identity throughout the year, this list would be really easy. If we haven't, it's going to be a little bit more challenged. So let's go back to those 7 guidelines. And we're going to go through these pretty quickly so we don't fall too far behind. Okay, so the next guideline is be okay with silence. We talked about that at the beginning of this PD. It's like, do I play the music? Do I not play the music? Like, it's awkward and I don't like social awkwardness. So And it goes deeper when we're talking about identity and tough conversations, because there's going to not only be silence, but there's going to be discomfort at the direction that some of the conversations are going. But we don't necessarily have to save every moment. And there's an author, Robert Freed, he wrote The Passionate Teacher. I don't know if you guys have read that book, but he said any of us, when we're nervous or when things threaten to get out of control, we're likely to revert to a more controlling or defensive posture. So when we start to talk about these issues, it's easy to want to come back in and sort of take control again. But when we learn to sort of accept this discomfort, that like it's part of the learning, then we're going to end up giving students those opportunities to take the lead. Number 5, decenter your normal. So we all have what is normal for us, right? We have a lens through which we see the world because of our own experiences. And we tend to normalize everything that falls within that lens. And if things fall outside of that lens, then we tend to marginalize those things. Like, that's not normal. That's not what I consider to be normal. And if we want to do this work with students where we are helping them to explore and sort of identify their identity, sorry for the double identify there, but if we want that work to be done, we as teachers have to decenter our definition of normal. And then 6, enter with humility. That means we don't know everything, and not everybody's going to think the way that we think. And then last, remember that progress takes time, effort, and hard work. Don't get discouraged when things go awry. They will. It is incremental work over time. Okay, so you're probably thinking, okay, we're 30 minutes into the training and we haven't gone over any activities yet. Well, we kind of have. We haven't totally gone into it, but we started one earlier. So we are going to be talking now. Now we're ready. We sort of have set that groundwork, and we're ready now to talk about how do we build identity through workshop. And again, we're going to be focusing on these 3 areas. So reading, talk, and writing, which are all foundational parts of Readers and Writers Workshop. So we're going to go ahead and start with reading. And some of the activities we're going to go through in depth, like this one, and then there's others that we're going to go through really quickly. I'm just going to sort of mention them to you. So know that some will spend more time on and some will spend less. So identity webs, what are they? So identity webs are personalized graphic tools that help us to consider the many factors that shape who we are. And why would we do that? What's the point of doing an identity web? Once they've been done, they can become sort of like an entry point to initiating conversation with students. It's also a way for students to be able to identify commonalities and differences. And most importantly, it helps you to understand who your student is so that you know how to best teach them. And it also helps us to see the humanity in one another. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go over the steps of what you would do in this activity, and then we'll do it together. Step 1. So you're going to invite students to think, write, pair, share about identity. So what does identity mean to you? Then you're going to choose an engaging text to read with your class. So a read aloud, right? This is how it fits into Readers and Writers Workshop. This is how you don't need to take another period of time out of your day to do this work. Do this directly as part of your read aloud. Step 3, you will model an identity web during the read aloud. So as you're reading aloud, you're creating an identity web about the character. Then step 4, and you might preface this by starting your own, modeling your own creating of an identity web of yourself, but also this is the opportunity where students will make their webs. And then 5, they'll share their webs. So they'll share their ideas. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to go through this. We're going to take some shortcuts because this is an activity that you would do not in one sitting. You would probably do this work over the span of 2 days, 2 or 3 days. So we're going to kind of do it in a quick way, but let me go ahead and give you this link. I'm going to put a link in the chat right now, and we're going to start with our think, pair, share. And I want you to, on this Padlet, go ahead and let me change the chat. There we go. I want you to add what comes to mind when you hear or see the word identity. Go ahead and go into that link. I'm going to give you about a minute and a half to answer that question. Go ahead and do that now. I also have people that are asking for access to the slides, and I apologize, I didn't send those at the beginning. Let me put it in the chat now. And as you're writing that, so some of my primary teachers, you might be thinking like, where does this fit in with the younger grades? It absolutely can be done with the younger grades. And a first grade teacher that did this, the way that they sort of help the kids to define identity is what you're like on the inside and what you're like on the outside. So they sort of simplified the definition of identity, but made it accessible to their age group. Okay, so you probably can see on my screen as these are popping up, if you've come back, a lot of who I am, who you are to the core, heritage, culture, my place in the world, family, culture, work, ethnicity, hobbies, who and what I am in this world. Who are you? What defines you? It revolves around your personality, beliefs, qualities. I can't read them long enough before they pop down again. All right, great. Thank you for taking the time to answer that. Okay, so what we're gonna do is I'm gonna put you in a breakout room just for really about a minute and a half. It's gonna be a random, you're gonna be with one partner, and I just want you to talk with them about what you wrote, about what you think about identity. Go ahead and you can, I'm going to put you in those breakout rooms now. Okay, so I think that everyone is back now. So we're going to go ahead and continue. I know that was a short amount of time, but at least this time it was 4 people. My goal was to put you in rooms of 2, but I didn't take into account the fact that we can only do up to 50 rooms. So for now, that's what we're going to do. Okay, so you would begin with this process of talking about identity. Then you would bring in your book that's going to lead to this work of talking about identity. So I chose this book because it is available on Epic. And I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but I do want to just sort of give you a little taste of the book. Maybe some of you guys have read it already. Ada Marie said not a word till the day she turned 3. She bounced in her crib and looked all around, observing the world, but not making a sound. She learned how to climb and made her big break with a trail of chaos left in her wake. She ran through the day chasing each sound in sight and didn't slow down till she conked out at night. Now, as you would be doing this work, you'd be doing the identity web with them while you're reading. In this case, I've already done it and I'm just going to show it to you guys afterwards, but know that with your students, you would be doing this with them live. So this would be one full day, these 2 pieces that we've done right now. Her parents were frazzled, but tried not to freak as Ada grew bigger and still did not speak. Clearly, young Ada, with lots in her head, would have something to say when it ought to be said. And I'm seeing that it's blurry. And you know what, you guys, I think that that's because It's on my iPad because my district second screen broke. So just kind of do your best with it. That's just what happened when Ada turned 3. She tore through the house on a fact-finding spree and climbed up the clock just as high as she could. Her parents yelled stop, as all good parents would. Ada's chin quivered, but she did not cry. She took a deep breath and she simply asked why. Why does it tick and why does it talk? Why don't we call it a granddaughter clock? Why are there 3 pointy things stuck to a rose? Why are there hairs up inside of your nose? She started with why and then what, how, and when. By bedtime, she came back to why once again. She drifted to sleep as her dazed parents smiled at the curious thought of their curious child who wanted to know what the world was about. They kissed her and whispered, "You'll figure it out." Her parents kept up with their high-flying kid whose questions and chaos both grew old as she did. Even Miss Greer found her hands were quite full when young Ada's chaos wreaked havoc at school. But this much was clear about Miss Ada Twist. She had all the traits of a great scientist. Ada was busy that first day of spring, testing the sounds that make mockingbirds sing. When a horrible stench whacked her right in the nose, a pungent aroma that curled up her toes. Zowie, said Ada, which got her to thinking, what is the source of that terrible stinking? How does a nose know where there's something to smell? And does it still stink if there's no nose to tell? She rattled off questions and tapped on her chin. She'd start at the start where she ought to begin. A mystery, a riddle, a puzzle, a quest. This was the moment that Ada loved best. I'm reading fast so I can read the whole thing because I feel guilty not reading it. I feel like it's going to be like, oh, but I want to read it. Ada did research to learn all she could of smelling and smells, both the stinky and good. One hypothesis Ada thought could be true. The terrible stink came from Dad's cabbage stew. She tested and tested, but soon Ada knew it was time to come up with hypothesis 2. Then zowie, the stink struck again, just like that. Hypothesis 2, it's caused by the cat. The cat couldn't make such a stink on its own. It needed perfume and some fancy cologne. So young Ada tested. The test was a flop. She started again, but her parents yelled, stop. Ada Marie, to the thinking chair now. By the time we count 3, enough, said her mother. That's it, said her dad. Her parents were frustrated, frazzled, and mad. Why? Ada questioned. Her mother said, no. What? Ada queried. Her father said, go. You've ruined our supper. You've made the cat stink. Enough with the questions. Now sit there and think. She looked at her parents. Her heart turned to goo. Poor Ada Twist didn't know what to do. She sat all alone by herself in the hall, and Ada once more could say nothing at all. And so Ada sat, and she sat, and she sat, and she thought about science and Stu and the cat and how her experiments made such a big mess. Does it have to, I lost my place. Does it have to be so? Is that part of success? Are messes a problem? And while she was thinking, what was the source of that terrible stinking? Ada Marie did what scientists do. She asked a small question, and then she asked 2. And each of those led her to 3 questions more, and some of those questions resulted in 4. As Ada got thinking, she really dug in. She scribbled her questions and tapped on her chin. She started at why, and then when, and then what, how, and when. At the end of the hall, she reached why once again. Her parents called down and they came back to talk. They looked at the hallway and just had to gawk. No patch of bare paint could be seen on the wall. The thinking chair was now the great thinking hall. They watched their young daughter and sighed as they did. What would they do with this curious kid? Who wanted to know what the world was about? They smiled and whispered, we'll figure it out. And that's what they did, because that's what you do when your kid has a passion and a heart that is true. They remade their world. Now they're all in the act of helping young Ada sort fiction from fact. She asked lots of questions. How could she resist? It's all in the heart of a young scientist. And as for that smell, but learn all she can. And as for that smell, what can Ada Twist do? But learn all she can with her friends in grade 2. Will they discover the stink that curls toes? Well, that is the question. And someday, who knows? The end. Okay, so now after reading, during the reading of that book, you would be doing the process, you'd be going through the process of creating an identity web during the read aloud. So let me go ahead and reshare put that in present form. So you can see how I've sort of started the process. So Ada twists of some of it is like characteristics of who she is, like traits, like curious, active, unique. Some of it's about her family. Some of it's about the things that matter to her, like science. And she asks a lot of questions. And some of it's about like big moments in her life, like the Hall of Thinking, right? The stink. That was like a sort of a pivotal moment in her life, was trying to figure out this stink. And all of this plays together into who she is. So now step 4, students would make their own identity webs. And this isn't something that would just be done once. This is something that you would do multiple times. So let me look at the clock and let me just see how we're doing on time, 12:49. Okay, so what I would like you to do, if you have your piece of paper, can't see it because of my background. If you have a piece of paper, I want you to take, we're going to take about 3 minutes, and I want you to create, and I'm going to do it as well, an identity web for yourself. Who are you? Okay, so go ahead and begin that work now. So start with your name in the middle. I'll share my screen as I'm doing mine, and then you guys can, let me just see where it is.
Go through the advanced.
I got it. I got it. By the way, you can use drawings, you can use words, however you want to do it. Okay, go ahead and stop. I am going to, so our next step after we had worked through this, and of course, as a teacher, while students are working on this work, you'd be walking around observing. And then what you would do after that is you would give students opportunity to share either in partnership. So we're going to share. So when you meet in your group, you can just sort of hold it up, since we're not being too fancy here right now. And I'm going to go ahead and put you in rooms. You are going to go back in the same rooms with the people that you were in before. Here we go. Okay, as everyone's sort of popping back in right now, I know you probably only had time for like one person to share, and it's just because I want to get to some of these other activities. But some of the things that we're thinking about as we're preparing students to share is, first of all, sort of setting those expectations of what is appropriate. How do we deal with these sort of maybe personal sensitive topics that might come up in the web, in a way that other students would feel comfortable with. So one thing that you might be thinking about is when they want to ask a question, what are you wondering about some of the things I wrote down? And it's really important that we teach students to respect those personal details that people might have included in their identity web that maybe they are or are not ready to talk about. So one way that we could do that is by telling kids, teaching them to sort of word it like this. Are you comfortable answering a question about your parents? Like I noticed that it says parents, dad dead, dad passed away. If it was a kid writing it, they'd probably say dad dead, because adults, we're the ones that use these other sort of words to represent it. But are you comfortable answering a question about your parents? So teaching students to be empathetic, even in the way that they are exploring other students' identities. Now, how would we use these throughout the year? Is this like a one and done? No, we would use it during reading workshop. How? Keep their identity webs in their reading journals or in their desk. What parts of your identity connects to what you're reading? When they're doing those stop and jots, how does their identity connect or not connect to what they're reading? And what makes this book a window? Or what is it about what you're reading right now that sort of helps you to see parts of yourself or understand parts of yourself? And then also having those webs out during writing workshop. So what parts of your webs have shown up in your stories? What's missing? And then using that in revision. How do we encourage our students to embrace their identity within their writing? Sort of like the way that Elizabeth did in her Ode to Rats. Okay, so now we're going to go through a couple really quickly, okay? So next one, reading graffiti. This is something really easy, doesn't take hardly any work. Put up an anchor chart in your class and tell the students, this is the graffiti wall. And on this graffiti wall, you can take words and parts from your favorite books and you can add them to this graffiti wall. And why would we do this? Well, this allows students to identify parts of books that felt powerful to them, or parts that affected them. So it's sort of an outlet for them to be able to connect with parts of a book, but in a way that not only will they sort of get into because it's the whole graffiti idea, but also because it encourages other students to want to read that book. So in a way, it's kind of like a book, oh, I'm forgetting the name of it right now, but like a book commercial or advertisement. There's a name, I can't remember it, sorry.
We call it a book blast.
There we go, book blast, perfect. Okay, so now we're moving on to talk. So how could this look, what could this look like in talk? So some of the activities we're gonna look at right now, we're gonna be looking at partner talk, things that could happen in partner talk, things that could happen in whole class talk, or things that could happen in book club talk. Let me just look at the time, okay. So Sarah Ahmed in her book, I keep going back to her. She says, before the first bell rings in the morning, all of our kids are coming to school with their own news. Sometimes it's news from home. Other times it's from an event over the weekend or something that happened at school. Other times it's an event, feeling, or information that they will most likely carry with them all day. When we neglect the myriad of news that they are coming in with, we are ignoring factors that may impede their ability to learn and engage with their day. Okay, so this next activity is called What's in My News? And this is an activity that you can do. It could be during morning meeting. It could be as a way of doing partner talk, teaching partner talk. And what this is you give kids time and space to investigate the questions that they have about their news. So it sheds a light on what our students see as news in their life, and it supports them in thinking through their questions about it. Why would we do this? It gives us that immediate relevant opportunities to practice the skills of social comprehension. So it gives the kids those opportunities. And us examining it with kids helps us to make sense of what's going on in their world. So what does it look like? So you can see here, it's a Jamboard. If I were to do this in class, I would have students just take a pen and I would have them in their journals, just draw, I don't know, let's see if we can get it in there, but just draw 4 quadrants. Just draw 4 quadrants and it would look like this. So first of all, what's my news? What's in my news? Second of all, what's my thinking about that? Third, how does that connect to my identity? And fourth, what's my action? What am I going to do about that? Or am I going to do anything about that? And it's important that when we think about what our news is, we're not just talking about like media news, like things you see on the actual news, but like things that are going on in their lives, both good and bad. It doesn't have to all be heavy material. Sometimes it's celebrations, but things that are going on in their life that they want to share, that they want to not only share, but also connect with their identity. So when should we do this? Well, anytime, first of all, but also when the world hands us curriculum the night before. And what I mean by that is when something has happened and the kids want to talk about it. I mean, for a lot of us, that was 9/11, right? We were at school when that happened. Not one of us was going to go in there and learn anything about math that day. We needed to talk. We wanted to address and share what was going on in our minds, process what was going on. And sometimes the world hands us some curriculum. The other thing is when we're asking kids to form and craft an opinion piece. So in writing, this might be some good work to do when they're trying to generate ideas about what to write about. Now, what does this look like? What are the steps? So step 1, consider what is news. Like what would be something that would qualify as news in your life? Then you as the teacher might want to model this, like you filling out what's news in your life, and be real. Don't share something that's like the kids are going to know. If you're like, there's all this, there's really important stuff to deal with and you're talking about cereal for breakfast, like, I mean, I know nobody would actually do that. I'm being facetious, but my point is be real with the kids. Let them in too. I mean, obviously there's things that are not appropriate, but let them in a little bit to your lives if you want them to let you into theirs as well. Step 3, students jot about what is in their news and then they share with a partner. Then you would take that next step of teaching them, well, how does that connect with my identity? And that's where that identity web comes back in. So look at my news. Why does this matter to me? And this is so important. Listen to this. Our identity affects how we respond to the world. Something that matters to me might not matter to the person next to me, because who I am and what is my norm, what is my lens is what makes it important to me. But that is also what we're trying to overcome by doing this as a group, because maybe what's outside of my lens should be important to me too. So we model how our news connects with your identity webs. Then students connect their news to their identity. So you model it, they do it, and then they share with a partner. And then last, if you want, you can have them create action steps. Would you do this every day? No, of course not. Would you do it often? I think it's important. Kids need to talk about what's going on in their lives. They come, I'm going to go back so we don't see that page yet. If you've read Kids Deserve It, I don't know if anybody's read that book, but the author talks about how we all have a suitcase, Third grade teachers are like, we know all about the suitcase, rising tiger, but we all have a suitcase. And what he says is, teachers, leave your suitcase in the trunk when you get to school. But I got news for you. Kids, whether teachers can do that or not, that's up for debate. Kids cannot do that. Kids cannot leave their suitcase in the car when they get to school. So it's important that we give them that opportunity to talk and to understand what it is about their identity that make things matter to them. Next activity, drawing our bias. So at the beginning of this PD, I had you draw a scientist. And the whole purpose of that was to talk about bias. So look at your drawing. Go ahead and pull out your scientist drawing again. Ask yourself some questions about your drawing. First of all, was it a man? Was your scientist a male or was it female? We know that just statistically, when people think about scientists, they automatically envision men. Why? Because there's a bias there. Now, maybe you drew a female, especially if you are a female. I'm not saying that we all carry biases with us, but in this picture that you see here, you see that it's colored in. Probably most of you guys didn't have colors, but if you did, what color would you have colored it? Would it have been the color of your skin? Most likely, because that's what you relate to. But do we bring bias with that? So doing this activity with kids, having them fully do it and color it and do the whole thing really brings up some beautiful topics of conversation of why do we immediately think this is what a scientist looks like? When we just saw little Ada, she broke all of those stereotypes of what a scientist would be. And of course, as we're doing this, we're still creating that safe environment for all students so that they should never feel shame. That's not the point of this. The point is not to make any student feel shame. The point is to identify our biases, to work through them, to help create a bias-free classroom that is safe for all kids. Okay, next one, grand conversations. We're gonna move through this. So I literally could do an entire training on grand conversations. And in fact, I have 2 trainings that are on my list of things that I didn't get to this year just because other topics were addressed. Grand conversations is one of them, and having successful book clubs is the other one. Those are in my docket, my brain docket for next year. But grand conversations, I just want to briefly touch on it, are incredibly powerful. Why? Not only because it gives our kids opportunity to talk, although it does, but because it gives them the control over the conversation. They are able to self-facilitate. And as it says there under the why section, we know that conversation is a catalyst for learning. That's why we collaborate. That's why we talk. Because when we are just doing it in our own brain, it's like, well, this could be good. But once we start talking, we start thinking about different things. It's like other people's opinions and views. All of a sudden, it's like, wow, I've learned so much. And by putting the conversation and the thinking into the students' hands, kids are being acknowledged as, listen to this, the constructors of knowledge. They're the ones creating that knowledge. And they are given the power to do the tough talking and the tough thinking. Because guess what? They will do it. They don't have that sort of filter sometimes that we have where we sort of avoid certain topics. Now, I would love to sort of get into what this fully looks like. We're going to watch a short clip of, and we probably won't watch the whole thing, of some students sort of participating in a grand conversation. But one thing that you really need to know is that the teacher during a grand conversation should be basically non-existent in the conversation. So how does that work? Because I mean, we know that kids, that's not natural for them, right? Like you have to teach them that. And one of the beautiful tools is, and I have it linked here, and of course I'll send out all the resources afterwards, but is this idea of this trouble initiating talk tool. So what I would encourage you to do during this grand conversation, let's say the kids are in a circle, you'll see that in a second. take these trouble initiating talks and write them out on index cards or sticky notes or whatever. And then keep them on a ring. Put them, hole punch them, keep them on a ring. Your job as the teacher is to walk around the outside of the circle. And as you see students that are struggling to talk, you hand them a sentence frame. You don't say one word to them, because the second they hear your voice, you're taking their voice away. I know that sounds kind of harsh. I don't mean it to, but it really is. But when you are not there, you just set it down, sort of the equivalent of sending a private chat, right? When you set it in their lap, you are giving them the tools that they need for their voice to be heard. Now, what would grand conversations be about? Typically, it's about a read aloud. So typically you would do a read aloud and then, well, excuse me, and then students would have a grand conversation. But it could also be about other things. For my primary grades, you guys could be doing questions, these question prompts. What are you usually doing when you're the happiest person ever? What do you like or enjoy about your community or neighborhood? What is something that makes you upset? Or maybe even it could be like a picture prompt. You guys can probably guess what this picture is of, right? COVID, parents being separated from their children to stay safe during COVID. But the read aloud is a great way to do it. So I'm just going to show you.
We are going to have a grand conversation.
Okay, so I'm going to skip the first part, but she basically just goes over the expectations. She's just sort of preparing them. She gives them some, pause this. She gives them some sentence frames, and then we're going to go ahead and watch the grand conversation.
So you wait for a turn to.
Sister Tad died. It said like she couldn't take it anymore. Especially when Stella died, it was kind of saying like it didn't say she died. It just said they threw Stella's body in a dumpster. Yeah, that was just really sad because she had worked through so much. Somehow I knew that in order to live, I had to let my old life die. But my sister could not let go of our home. It held her like a vine stretching across the miles, comforting and straining me. We were still in our crate when she looked at my.
Okay, I'm going to pause it just again for the sake of time. So this work doesn't happen overnight. This was something that I did with my kids when I was teaching, when I was in the classroom, and you have to teach them everything, even down to how do you know if nobody raises their hand, how do you know when to talk? That's a social skill. We have that as adults. Well, some of us do, right? We should have that. When we're in a meeting, you sort of can sense when somebody's wanting to talk, right? You can see that they want to talk, or like if two people start talking at the same time, one of you has to back off. And there's like that social etiquette that we have to teach our kids. Or even thinking about like, when that first person backs off, what's the social etiquette rule? That when the other person finishes, it's the person who backed off, it's their turn. So nobody else in the room better start, right? Those are all things that we teach our kids as part of this grand conversation. And again, next year, I'll follow up with a little bit more training on that. Okay, writing. So writing, this one will just be a quick one. I'm just gonna tell you about it. So this activity, it's called Identifying Experts. And I did this in my class for 2 years. And basically what it is you are finding students within your classroom and you're building their identity as writers. How? By finding one thing that they do really well. They do not have to be the best writers. In fact, they shouldn't be. Yes, of course, you're going to have some of your high performing students in there, but it should be a mixture of students. And you'll see here what it says. It says, ask Emma how to unfreeze people in your story. Ask Ethan how to tell something bit by bit. Ask Jake how to bring out the inside of a character. So you're spotlighting strengths of your students so that they can build their identity as writers. And I believe this is our last one for today. And this is called the Where I'm From poem. And the Where I'm From poem is written by George Ella Lyon, but it's basically turned into this, like a template where students can sort of explore their identity, their families, their history through the structure of this poem. So the poem includes object and details about the author's identity, and it has a very set structure. Why should we do this? Well, it helps kids to focus on the specific people, places, things, and ideas that are meaningful to them. So not just like labels and big descriptions of who they are, but the things that actually matter to them and make up who they are. And it sort of helps the students, sorry guys, I kind of went backwards, let me go back. So it helps the students to understand or sort of have a window. It helps us as teachers and other students to have a window to who this student is. Okay, so what are the steps for this activity? So the steps are, step one, show them what a Where I'm From poem is. So first they have to understand, like, what is this kind of poem? Second, you're going to read aloud a mentor poem using interactive read aloud strategies. Okay, so this would be like your read aloud time, kill two birds with one stone, and you're going to read aloud so that they can really understand the meaning of the poem. Again, this won't all happen in one day. Step three, use the poem as a mentor text. So tell the students, you can use this poem and you can ask yourself, what is this author doing that I could do, that I could try? And then step four, independent work time for the students to generate, plan, and draft. You can give them a scaffold. If they need it, I believe it's the next slide, I have an upper grade scaffold and a primary scaffold. And step five, they will share their poems with each other. So I chose two mentor texts, and the reason I specifically chose these is because they represent two very different lenses. So when you read these, you're going to get a feel for what these kids, who they are. So I'll read the first one to you. I am from the Mexican candy. From Elmer's glue and scissors, I am from headaches and Fabuloso cleaning products. Some of you guys are like, I can relate to that. I know I can. I am from a cactus whose pricks hurt the palm of my hand. I am from trains and stickers, from Crawford and Westcott. I am from exploring new things and making them ours, from cooking delicious food, from the room in our house to make art. I am from violin lessons and guitar. I am from ancient people and new ones, from Mexican rice and refried beans, from great Uncle Caesar skipping school to learn how to fly planes. I am from those moments where my mom and I walked hand in hand looking for new adventures. And then listen to this other one. I am from my loving dog, from children's books and fairy lights strung in my room. I'm from the house on the cul-de-sac, big brick covered smells of food. I'm from plants in the backyard, seeing them as I swim. I'm from going downtown and road trips in the car, from going to my brother's games and being with my grandparents. I'm from the beach every summer and swimming at night, from try your hardest and do your best. I'm from church on Sundays and family dinners. I'm from Texas warm summers, ice cream every night, Whataburger too, from getting Buster Dairy Queen on his birthday for as long as I can remember. I am from these moments, trapped in a Shutterfly photo album. So it's interesting reading these, how you feel really like you sort of like know who these kids are, right? We don't, of course, but we really can get an idea of who their identity is, where they came from these poems that they wrote. They chose the things that mattered to them, the little memories, the things that they heard growing up, try your hardest, do your best. And they're able to identify sort of what makes them them, but more importantly, everyone else gets a window into who they are and what their identity is. Now, there, of course, are scaffolds that you could use for this poem, and I've linked here two templates. One is for lower grades, primary grades, and one is for upper grades. And if we had a 2-hour training, I would absolutely have us write these because I just think that that would be so powerful. Unfortunately, we don't, but I really would encourage you going back to those 7 guidelines. Our very first one is do the work before you have the kids do the work. So try it on yourself. Fill out this poem. Who are you? When you read that poem back, will your kids, maybe the first day of school, you read that poem to them, and your kids all of a sudden have a little insight into who their teacher is, what the identity of their teacher is. Okay, so with that said, we are at the end of our training. I thought it was appropriate to end with where we started today. And we're going to watch this short clip and then we will close for the day.
I only have like one last thing to say, and it's the stories I chose to tell today are ones that have very specific cultural markers to them. And going back to that rat ode of what are the markers that we say deserve space of being told, that I'm really concerned with the ways with which we say that certain cultural groups and the symbols that they have no place in our national narrative. And I just want to make sure that as we walk through spaces, we realize that there's a lot of macro at play, right? And why things are what they are. But sometimes it's those little things that we say every day that build up as to why someone thinks they have value or don't have value. So we have to be mindful of the stories and myths we are choosing to tell about people, and that we are allowing them to tell about themselves. I want to thank you so much for being here and the work that you all are doing.
So as we finish off this training this year, I think the challenge for each of us is how do we make our classroom a place where kids can tell their story, where kids can feel the freedom to figure out who they are, to honor their identity, to search their identity, and that we as teachers provide the environment and the activities, the time, the routines for that work to happen. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna put this link in the chat for you. This is our last feedback form of the year. And I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, and hopefully I won't get emotional, but just thank you so much to each of you for attending the trainings, for just showing so much love to me throughout this whole year. It truly has been an honor to do this work with you guys. And I love my job. I think I am the luckiest person in the world.
Come in, you gotta get ready now.
To be able to do this work. And so thank you everyone. And if you could just fill out that form before you go. And I hope that if I don't see you guys again, I hope you have an amazing summer break, and right before we know it, we'll be back. So, so please don't forget to fill out the form.